we take the story on. Anne was getting help from some advisors who were trying their best to try and help her. And one of the things that did crop up in this time was that Anne was awarded, after a long battle, £13,000 from the Criminal Injuries Compensation Authority. But there was no record of any crime having been committed. So public money was given to a woman who officially had not been the victim of crime. How could it be? To shut them up, obviously. But no crime had been committed, as far as the law was concerned. So time went on, and about a year ago, I was invited in to try and see if I could do anything to help the story along, to try and bring the people to justice, and to perhaps bring the story into the public domain, which I have tried hard to do. When I started my investigations, I had the same kind of problems. Everybody wanted to block it and everything like that. But we did have a breakthrough with the media on the 19th of April 2009, when journalists from the News of the World took up the story in a rather sort of muted form, but it picked up on the fact about the payment from the Criminal Injuries Compensation Authority. I did a story on Hollie, which is also picked up by the local paper where Anne and Hollie now live in Shropshire, where they had to flee to because of the threats and abuse that they were suffering at the time. They had to escape from Aberdeen and from their home country, Scotland. Now, when this became apparent that things were not moving in any way at all, we had another bit more support, because suddenly we got a call from the BBC Scotland in Glasgow, from one of their senior investigators, a man called Mark Daly, who some of you may remember as doing something about the secret policeman, where he covertly joined the police force in Cheshire to actually find about racism that existed in the police force. And for this, he was granted an award, and there was a big programme on it, and he became very famous. He approached Anne and Hollie and myself and said, BBC would like to do a big story on this. Could we assist them? Could we provide the documentation, which Anne had very, very skillfully retained? And but it had to be on the basis that it was an exclusive for the BBC. It was confirmed that 2 programmes had been commissioned, one on BBC Television Scotland, one on BBC Radio Scotland, and that Panorama were going to do a full story that would be broadcast nationally. Mark Daly, having all the evidence, everything that he could see about this story, it was backed up, all the contradictions, all the false things that the police and the judicial people and even people from the National Health Service had made, all the false statements, all there, all blatant, and they were happy to go ahead with it. Mark told me that this was a story that would go round the world. He said, this is one of the worst stories I've ever heard, but I know there are other cases in Scotland concerning paedophilia that we're looking into as well, and of course the level of corruption by the authorities made this doubly appalling. Now, this went on for about 6 weeks. We had lots of discussions with the BBC team, and everything was set to go. On the 10th of June 2009, I received a call from a distraught Mark Daly. And he said, he said, Robert, he said, I'm sorry, I've got some really bad news for you and Anne and Hollie. And I said, well, what's that, Mark? He said, we can't do the programme. I said, what do you mean you can't do the programme? You said, you even got in writing that you're going to do the programme. Well, how can it be? He says, I can't talk about it, he says, but we were threatened. We've been told we cannot not only do Hollie's story, but we can actually do no more investigations into any stories concerning paedophilia in Scotland. If we do, we will be sacked. The 3 of us, that is Mark Daly, Cathy Long from BBC Radio Scotland, and Liam McDougall of Panorama. We will be sacked. I said, Mark, you can't allow this to happen. He said, well, we fought our corner. He said, we believe the story. It's absolutely 100%. But that is what we were told. So I said, Mark, who told you this? I said, who told you? And what kind of person would want to prevent a story like this coming out? So terrible. This sweet little girl and a lot of other, and 7 other child victims that we knew about who would actually want to stop this story coming out? He says, I can't tell you, Robert. He says, I can't talk to you anymore. He says, I can't tell you. He says, we'll all be sacked. So, obviously, I pressed with the BBC, with the Director General Mark Thompson and the head of the BBC Trust, Sir Michael Lyons. Of course, did I get anywhere with anybody? No. All I got letters saying, Mr. Green, if you wish to a complaint, we have a particular forum for that, the complaints department of such and such a place, as if I were complaining about someone using a naughty word at 7 o'clock in the evening. That is how it was treated. Mark Daly never contacted me again, apart from sending a letter apologising to Anne and making a few unfair comments, but nevertheless saying that he believed in the case and he believed everything that he had been told. Now, this obviously presented us with a setback, because we were convinced that if the BBC had got hold of it, which they promised to do, the story would have been out last summer and the world would have known about it. But of course, this was a setback for us. Nevertheless, we persisted, kept the pressure on. One of the things I must say in this case, working for Anne and Hollie, they are two of the bravest women I've ever come across. Nothing frightens them. They've been through hell, but they are so determined, not only for justice for Hollie, but justice for the other children that have been abused, and all the other children in Scotland who are being abused now and will be abused in the future because of the inaction and the collaboration of the authorities. So she's absolutely determined. Nothing will frighten them. In fact, in August last year, they were intimidated. A shot was fired at the window of their home in Shropshire, a quiet little village where nothing ever happens, where crime is virtually unknown. But it bounced off the window, fortunately. But it was at head height, and either of them could have been injured or even killed. The police are supposed to be reinvestigating the case after I came into it. They said they would look at it again, but they didn't do anything. They never made any attempt to interview Anne and Hollie. They just stayed up in Aberdeen, and nobody did anything. When the shot was fired, I emailed Alex Salmond, who had already told about the case, I'd already informed him what was going on, and the fact that we felt that the Lord Advocate, a member of his government, was deeply involved in the case. And when the shot occurred, I emailed him, and I also called the Chief Constable in Aberdeen, Grampian Police, to say that if anything happened to my clients as a result of this, I would hold them personally to blame. They had all the time that they could possibly have to look at this case, dangerous, vicious people, and they'd done nothing about it. And now, because we were putting the pressure on, there was a real threat to the lives of my clients. Well, they did, in fact, get in quick time, 2 officers from the Grampian Police were sent down to Shropshire to interview my clients. This took place on the 8th of September. We met at the main police station in Shrewsbury, and we were taken to one of the houses that they use to interview victims of rape, which are not as sort of deterring as a police station would be, a little bit slightly more relaxed, if that is the right word. And we went to the house. Anne was interviewed upstairs by one of the police officers, accompanied by 2 of the people from the Mercia force. And Hollie was interviewed downstairs by another officer, Lisa Evans, accompanied by another police officer from the Shrewsbury area, and a social worker as witness. I was not allowed to sit in at the interviews, but I was allowed to sit next to a very thin partition door. Hollie was being interviewed in the lounge. There's a wooden sliding door there to connect it with the kitchen. I was able to sit right next to the door with my notebook. Because Hollie has hearing difficulties, the conversation was at a higher decibel level than perhaps would have been normally in a conversation, so I was able to hear just about everything that was said. And I sat there for 3.5 hours, listening to this poor girl relating and reliving all the horrors that had been inflicted upon her for year after year. She went through everything, told about every name, the sheriff, Sheriff Graham Buchanan, all the others, named them. Most of the rapes, in fact, took place at the home of the sheriff's sister, Evelyn Buchanan. It was absolutely awful. But Hollie, the thing that I think also made a great impression on me was the bravery of Hollie. She went through this. It was I'm sure all of you here could understand a woman being asked to relive multiple rape over and over again, to face questioning about it. But for 3.5 hours, she stood her ground. Everything she told me was everything I'd heard before, exactly consistent with what she told the BBC, exactly consistent with all the documentary evidence we'd had.